Brennan Eberwein. Thank you for being with us.
I'd like to thank all the candidates for being here, and we will start with candidate opening statements. We'll go from my left to right. So, please continue.
Well, I'm Linda Duncan, and for the past 16 years I've represented District 5 on the board, having taught 21 years at Southern High School and Fairville High School, and then finishing off my career at Fairville High School as assistant principal. Pandemic took a toll on our youngest learners and our learners that struggled without supervision. But it did not erase our gains that we've made over the past years. Last year we had the highest graduation rate, 84.7%. We had the highest graduation rate for our African American students, 84.3%. We had the highest college and career ready rate, 70%. And we have 2 new schools that we opened, and 2 schools opening next year. We have the new student assignment plan that allows for the end of forced busing and for having for parents to be able to choose whether their children are going to the closest school.
Good evening. My name is Greg Pachetti, and I'm running for District 5 School Board. I'm a retired Army colonel. I was infantry and military intelligence for 30 years in the active duty Army Reserve, Kentucky National Guard. Concurrently, I was also a JCPS teacher, and I just retired from teaching this last February. And so I've got firsthand knowledge of what's going on in the classroom, what teachers are thinking. I was also a activity bus driver, so I trained with the bus drivers for the last several years, and I know the problems, I know what they're thinking, and I just want to try to fix some of the problems that all teachers know exist, but have not been able to fix within the school. So hopefully at the school board level I can address some of those problems and get some successful schools in JCPS.
Mr. Singleton.
Hello, my name is Grant Singleton. I am a pastor as well as a tutor. I am a proud JCPS graduate from K-12 from Valley High School. And also, my mother is a retired JCPS teacher. And basically, I want 4 goals to reduce our property taxes. I want to raise standardized test scores. I want to get rid of indoctrination, as well as to make our schools safe again.
Thank you. I'll first start off with some general questions. What specific skills would you bring to the board? We'll start with Mr. Singleton.
Okay. One thing is being a minister, I've ministered to people anywhere from 2 to 102. And so I do have a full capacity. I'm working on a doctorate in biblical counseling. And so I'm able to see things from a different perspective. Also, I really relate to the neighborhood. I believe a school board member is supposed to represent the neighborhood and not just be a part of the system. The system has to be held to accountability, and that's what I want to do. That's why I've gone door to door to over 2,300 homes just so far.
Mr. Puccetti?
Specific skills, well, I have got my 27 years of teaching. I've been a resource teacher in JCPS in technology for many years. I've probably been to just about every school in JCPS and worked with teachers at every school. I know what teachers are thinking. As I mentioned before, I was an activity school bus driver. I know what the bus drivers are thinking. I know what's going on, what their issues are. I also have a PhD in education and organization skills through the military. As I said, I was a infantry and military intelligence colonel when I retired back in 2017. And so I want to use those skills in order to give direction to the JCPS board, a new direction away from the failed policies of the past.
Thank you. Ms. Duncan.
Well, I'm an educator, I retired as an educator after 32 years, and I've been on the board, so I've had plenty of experience at working with people and listening to people and trying to help them through problems, and I think probably that's one of the biggest skills I have, is being able to guide parents when they have concerns and trying to navigate the system, and be able to advocate for them and for their kids. Those are skills that I've developed as an assistant principal and as a teacher, and then on the board. They all just seem to go together well. I think being able to think clearly and make decisions based on the information that you have is a huge part of this job, and being able to have a realistic background to do that is I think probably one of the biggest skills I've learned, because we have to be realistic. We can't create policies and things that we know will not play out well in those classrooms. So I think my education background and my experience has prepared me well to be able to handle the issues and all the issues that we have to face. Thank you.
My next question is there a particular issue that motivates you to serve on the Board of Education? From the first order, Ms. Tompkins.
Would you repeat that question?
Certainly.
Where's it the volume?
Is that better? Is there a particular issue that motivates you to serve on the Board of Education?
Well, actually, there was one that I joined the board for. When I was teaching in a regular high school, when I was an administrator in a regular high school, it's very difficult to be competing in a regular high school with schools that have different rules about how they select their kids. And for me, I saw big concentrations of advanced program kids in certain schools and lack of advanced program kids in other schools. And then when test scores came out, it was surprise, surprise, the ones that had the most advanced kids had the best scores. So that imbalance in our system that was never well explained to the public, I think was one of the big motivators for me to join the board. I also was very interested in making sure that we had two items that nobody talks about very much, but one was nurses in our buildings, which fortunately we have today, and the other was monitors on buses, because we need more than one person to watch what kids are doing on buses. And that one is more of a challenge, but those items right there were really what drove me the first time to be on the board, and they continue to drive me right now. And I would love to be sure that we're addressing the needs of all of our students in all of our schools in a way that is fair in how we evaluate their schools.
My driving issue for joining the board is because the schools are in chaos and just about everybody knows it. People in businesses are not moving to Jefferson County because of the school system. If you're a business, a large corporation, for example, and you're thinking about headquarters here in Louisville, you have to think about your employees. And the employees do not want to send their kids to JCPS schools. Okay, they could pay $20,000 a year to send their kids to a private school, but why bother? So a lot of them are, even if the businesses do end up coming to Louisville, the families are moving across the river to Indiana or out to the eastern counties because they don't want to send their kids here. And that's just a fact. And many of the teachers who teach in Jefferson County also send their kids to private schools. And it's because they're in chaos. Chaos is resulting from student discipline, which has been out of control, and then also the lax academic standards. A big article in the newspaper recently about the test scores and assessment of JCPS in the state of Kentucky. They were touting the graduation rate, how it's the highest it's ever been. Well, if you graduate everybody, then it's going to be a higher graduation rate. If you lower the standards and just push people through, whether they learn anything or not, that's what's happening. I like to use the example, if you probably ever watched The Wizard of Oz. The Wizard of Oz, at the end of the show, or near the end, the wizard is giving gifts to everybody, and he goes to the Scarecrow and gives Scarecrow a diploma. And all of a sudden, Scarecrow's like, oh, equals MC squared, or whatever he says. And that's how they think it happens. That if you give them a diploma, suddenly they're going to be successful. That's not how it works.
Interesting.
So initially, I started seeing this in my private time. I'm a bit of a Baptist theologian, and you know, if you understand the history of the Baptists, we're the ones where they use the phrase separation of church and state. And I started seeing different things kind of go on in the early 2000s, dealing with Common Core and axioms that were used that would really, I believe, cross the line. They were just crossing in a different direction. And essentially, I believe as part of our freedom, especially with parents, parents should have the right to have the custody of their children when it comes to a matter of religion. And this is not a freedom, this is not an ownership that the school should ever possess being part of the government. And we are undereducated in our constitutional rights. And so I started seeing it there. I started seeing it as a youth minister. As early as 2015, there were kids complaining about being called racist and things like that. At first, I thought maybe it's their problem, but then I started seeing all this other research come down the pike. But I'll be honest with you, what happened just lately? I live 5 minutes and 30 seconds, I timed it this morning, from Iroquois High School. And I took a trip and I recorded it going through a trailer park that was very notorious for drug abuse and drug sales. And it was right there within walking distance of Iroquois Park. You could literally see it within 5 minutes, the Iroquois High School. And so essentially, we've got so much damage kind of going on right now. I see the heights of the economy and everything, but essentially we have a system that is becoming cannibalistic.
We'll now move on to some audience submitted questions. A relationship with the General Assembly is important. How would you ask the legislature, what would you ask the legislature to do to support JCPS? Start with Mr. Singleton.
You know, the way I see it is that I would like limited government to be as self-sufficient as possible. And there's a lot of weird strings that get attached. I found out about how, like, you know, our county is giving money to other counties, which that's nice until you realize that we have our own problems. And some of the issues we've had, like let's say in the West End schools, may have been able to be helped if we were more self-sufficient. And so that would really be my goal there. But there are categories and areas where obviously the state can chime in and help out. But essentially, some of these things are the things that we used to be able to do ourselves.
Sir Buchanan.
The state of Kentucky is overall in charge of education for all the districts in Jefferson County. With that said, I like the autonomy that JCPS does have in finding its own course based on its own culture and its own community. So one thing that I would ask is let that autonomy continue, and of course the second thing is going to be more money. There's lots of resources out there at the state level. One that I'm thinking of in particular is the school resource officers. They've made an unfunded mandate on not just JCPS but all the districts in the state to have an armed police officer or SRO in the school. And I think that's actually a good thing. I would like to see them kick in a little bit of money to make that happen, because right now we are not in compliance with the state mandate. And apparently we're working towards that, but I don't see that happening anytime soon unless we make a more concerted effort, and definitely money from the state would help out with that situation. I think it's really important for school safety. The armed SROs are not there to intimidate the kids, as some people suggest. They're there to help foster relationships and positive, healthy relationships between armed law enforcement officers and students. Because there's a lot of negative publicity surrounding police and different communities in Jefferson County. We need to stamp that out.
When I was first on the board, 56% of our funding came from the state. Over time now, about 25% of the funding comes from the state. So funding is an issue for us, and I would like to see funding delivered to us in the form of supporting SB1, which was the safety officers, and being able to have all of the officers in our buildings. We do need the extra funding to be able to expand the program from what we have, the 30 we have right now, and we are in the process of doing it. I'd like to see the funding for universal pre-K, because the achievement gap starts early, and we have to start early with that and allow for communities to support kids preschool. I'd like to see funding for salaries for teachers, because right now their workload is huge and it just keeps getting more difficult, and that's one of the reasons why we're struggling with staff. And I'd like to see funding for ESL, which is a growing population for us. Our kindergarten classes this year are 25% ESL. That just tells you where this is going. Right now, we say 15%, but kindergarten is 25%. You can see how that population is growing, their needs are growing, and we need to meet that with the funding that we need from the state as well.
Thank you. This next question is also from the audience. As a school board member, how would you respond to the efforts of certain sections of the population who advocate for the censoring or removal of existing curriculum or materials perceived by them to be in conflict with their personal beliefs in schools? Okay, I'll then. Mr. Suchek.
Sorry.
We're fanning out from the middle. We'll start with Mr. Suchek.
I'd just like to say that
Sir, he said Mr. Suchek. We'll start with
I'm not hearing very well.
Yeah, I think he wants you to restate the question.
Yes. As a school board member, how would you respond to the efforts of certain sections of the population who advocate for the censoring or removal of existing materials perceived by them to be in conflict with their personal beliefs in schools?
The whole idea of having community schools is that they reflect the values of the community. And I think the voice of the parents is very important in this aspect, because they're the community, it's their children that they're sending to the schools and trusting that the school system is going to conduct itself in a manner that's conducive to what their values are. We don't want things taught at schools that conflict with the values that they teach their children at home. And I think that's extremely important. I know that is a driving force for a lot of people sending their children outside of Jefferson County schools to private schools, because they don't agree with the values that are being taught at the schools. It's central, so you need to have a parent voice in what goes on, and I guess you could call it maybe a parent veto in opting out of their children being I guess, indoctrinated is the word I offer here, into values that conflict with values that they teach at home. So extremely important, and that's going to take a lot of discernment from board members and from school members as well to find that balance, because it's hard when you have, they always say diversity is our strength, but in this case, diversity can be a weakness, because you have, it's hard to find that common middle ground in community when you have all these different conflicting values. So it needs to be in the parents' hand. They need to have a choice, and they need to have a voice in what their child is being taught at school.
Go now to Ms. Duncan.
We have a process in place right now for when there is material that a parent finds objectionable, that the parent can contact the school, can contact the teacher, begin with the teacher, and ask for an explanation or for an ability to opt out of that. There's a process that if the teacher is not thinking that in agreement with that, then the appeal can go to the principal, and then from there, the principal has authority to appeal to the SBDM council. That's when curriculum was under the purview of SBDM councils. And so now what's happened is some of these items are going, curriculum decisions are going to the superintendent. We haven't, I think that's not in full swing, but that is the law now. And so we've got to adjust to that, and that process going to the SBDM council will be different. But right now, as in the case of library books, when there is an objection to library book, that process is in place, and if the SBDM council still supports the placement of the library book, then there is an appeal to a library appeals board. And then that board, which is not the school board, but that board then makes a decision concerning that material, whether that will be in the libraries or not. The parents always have the right, and I would support always their right to be able to not have their kids follow the curriculum, that if they object to that, and be given alternatives.
Mr. Singleton.
So when we talk about some of this material, it involves, cartoons of basically children and sex acts and different things. And I feel, I don't feel like talking about that much. But essentially, there are some laws that are being broken. One is the transportation of pornographic materials into some of these schools. I haven't heard it reported as low as elementary, although I don't know if that was accurate or if that's been changed. Now I hear more of like middle school discussion. But nevertheless, the ultimate authority, and the state will tell you, the ultimate authority is supposed to go to the school board, and they say, well, it's been delegated to Marpolio, and Marpolio says, well, we delegate to the on-sites. The on-site councils don't really have very much of a parent voice. You get maybe 2 parents out of a whole school. Now, you know what I think? I think the PTA needs to be a part of this discussion. I think that the parents can come through the PTA and basically enhance the PTA, and then we can build a bridge from the PTA onto the school board so we can have these conversations and perhaps even add a vote or 2, just depending. Some different ideas have been going through on that. But yes, we need to regain a bottom-up strategy and not all this top-down rigmarole where we pass a hot potato.
Thank you. Next question is also an audience question. What do you think JCPS needs to do to support our English language learners? So who's starting?
Well, I mentioned it's a growing population, and we attempt to incorporate the ESL students, the new ones, into Newcomer Academy, but our Newcomer Academy is almost at capacity right now. So we need more, I think, another Newcomer Academy. We need more of those at lower levels, 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, so we can support them when they come in. We need more ESL teachers. We need more our regular teachers trained to work with ESL students. We need more centers for, the newcomer centers, but centers for the training of our teachers to work with ESL population. We need an advocate at the top of the district for our ESL population. And I think we need an ESL equity policy because it's a quiet population that's not really, it's kind of quietly going along with things and growing with growing needs. And I think we need to think about what we could do as an equity policy for them. We need more after-school programs for them. We need more summer programs to get more of them involved. And we need to do a better job of following them when they transition back to our high schools from Newcomer Academy or from any school. When they transition back, we need more people to follow what their achievement is doing. That was some of the things. We need lots of things to support our growing ESL population.
Mr. Pacheco?
I actually agree that the Newcomer Academy is a fantastic component of helping the ESL people make that transition from whichever country or culture they come from, and learning English, getting acclimated to the way things are done in the United States, and above all, learning English. It's amazing how quickly young students, especially if they arrive in the United States in the elementary school, they pick up English super fast. I mean, it's incredible. I was at a yard sale in my neighborhood, and I was observing I want to say she was from a Middle Eastern country, but it was an elementary school student acting as translator between her mom and one of the residents of the community who was trying to sell her something. And I've seen that over and over again in parent-teacher conferences where the student is able to make that, has enough ability where they can act as a translator. I hate to put that burden on them, but at the same time, I mean, that's pretty awesome. So getting them to learn English is probably the best thing that we can do, and whatever resources that we can gear towards that and getting them to learn the English language, that acclimates them to the community, that makes them part of the school system, and I think that's just fantastic. One thing I think we could add to that is more support for the family. For example, my father came from, or he was born in an Italian household. He got held back in kindergarten because he didn't speak English, and his mom never really learned English. So I think giving more support to the family, to the parents, so they learn English, so they feel more part of the community and become more active in schools. That's what I would work towards.
Mr. Singleton?
Let me tell you something. Universal family values are universal. You know, as I've been able to walk around, I talked to a man of color from Chile, and he talked about how he wanted his daughter to grow up with values. I talked to a father from Arabic country, and he cared about his daughter so much. And also many people, Espanols and stuff, they just, they all want the same thing, and they work the same hardness. 2 days ago, we have a regular in our learning center who, this kid, he's learning English, and he's doing it quickly. He's doing it on the ball because he's got, you know, a family behind him moving him forward. And when you get the right values and you get the right help, you can do this. And we have to be careful about JCPS being such a closed system. We have friends and people we can work with that are already there, and I'm pushing for this idea of a, I just forget what to say, but basically a database that we can get all the assets of Jefferson County together, and parents can choose. Okay, well, I need this learning center. I need that therapist. I need this group. And here they are right there, getting the communication working as an open system, welcoming people, because there are people who are ready to teach, and they may not fit in your group, but sometimes when we get hard times, you need some other people to lift.
Thank you. This next question is on the shortage of teachers. Shortages of teachers and staff in schools has become a nationwide issue, and JCPS is no different. How do you plan on addressing this issue? We'll start with Mr. Singleton.
Okay, say it a little bit louder.
Shortages of teachers and staff in schools has become a nationwide issue, and JCPS is no different. How do you plan to address this issue?
So one thing is that the first thing, not going to be popular in certain groups, but essentially we've got to stop the bleeding. And what that means is if we lack the teachers and if we lack the busing, then maybe we can also reach out to these other school systems and we can help each other with that. When you have a business and you're flooded and you can't, you know, help people out, it just hurts things. You got to work with other people, and then what you do is you improve on your system and you'll get your customers back. Well, the same thing goes here. We need to kind of take a break and not be overloaded, and then reform our system so that it's working and functioning as much as possible. The other thing that's very obvious is the security. And, we all pretty much agree on, making things a safer environment. But my third idea is this. I'm thinking about a Robin Hood policy. We have a lot of people in JCPS who are making a lot of money who aren't actually educated. Meanwhile, some of the people who do the real work are not getting all the materials they can get. And I think that if we could cap the salary, and I'm just one of these guys who earns under $30,000, okay? But if we could cap the salary at $100,000 and then start getting bonuses to the teachers who are affected, who are working hard, I believe that we can climb this mountain.
Mr. Pacheco. Can you state the question again?
Yes. Shortages of teachers and staff in schools has become a nationwide issue, and JCPS is no different. How do you plan to address this issue?
When I first started teaching in JCPS, well, actually before I started teaching in JCPS, nearly 30 years ago, I went to the employment office at JCPS and we hired a social studies teacher, and there was no jobs. He showed me a stack of applications about this big, this tall, of people waiting to get a job at JCPS. So that was 30 years ago, and of those 30 years, obviously eventually I got a teaching position, but for those 30 years, the reputation of the teaching profession has gone downhill. The word's out that teaching, not just in JCPS, but nationwide, is a hostile working environment where you get little recognition, you get a lot of abuse, and it's just not worth it. So if you look at the pipeline for colleges, there's very few students going into education because of that reputation. We need to change that reputation around, starting with student behavior. As I mentioned before, was JCPS activity bus driver, also teacher, and the bus drivers, we can't get bus drivers either because they don't want to have to deal with the students because they are responsible for the students who are driving the bus, and they just, it's too nerve-wracking when you have rowdy kids in your bus. And for teaching, the teachers, they come to teach with a passion. They want to impart what they learned. They want to share what they learned with these students, but they can't do it because they're in a hostile working environment where you have groups of students roaming the halls and classrooms at will, disrupting the place. And that's why the pipeline is broken, because nobody wants to be a teacher.
I've made 23 visits to schools since school began, and I have not been in one where it was chaos. I think behavior is an issue in some situations and at moments, but it is not the general issue that is being presented. I think workload is probably what is driving so many of our teachers more even than the behavior that they're having to see. The workload when you're expected to individualize work, you're expected to teach kids who don't speak English as their first language. You're expected to implement IEPs, very closely monitored IEPs, and the expectations to work all day without a plan period in some cases. And I think what we're seeing is the expectations and the workload doing something, PD requirements increasing for if you're dealing with ECE students and if you're dealing with ESL students. I mean, the professional development has become immense for our staff. And I think we've got to start looking at workload and see how we can make sure that teachers have the time that they need to prepare for the kids that they're working with. And in fact, I wish we could have smaller class sizes, but the problem is right now with the shortage, class sizes are getting larger, which is even a bigger workload for our teachers. As far as our bus drivers, I think if we offered retired bus drivers more money to come back and drive for us, I think we would we would increase our load there tremendously. But I don't know why we haven't done that. To me, that's a possible solution. And don't think it's all about the salaries though, and I don't think it's all about the behavior.
Thank you. Our last question will be regarding school safety. Do you support the current JCPS security plan? Start with Mr. Singleton.
Well, essentially, I think that like when we talk about school safety and stuff, there's a couple different things going on. I've talked to people, I get most of my information is kind of like more earlier this year, but essentially, you know, you do have to have the police involved. I think that we need to have somebody working, like police officers working with the school buses. So if they go into a bad neighborhood, you have somebody patrol in about 15 minutes earlier. Also, there are programs that I think that would help people. I think on one hand, kids need to be prepared to have self-defense, but they also need to be prepared to stay away from violence at the same time. And so I encourage different classes and stuff that could be offered as electives in order to accomplish that task.
Mr. Buchetti.
I've been around the world in numerous countries, different continents, different situations in Africa, Europe, you name it. And the one thing that is a hallmark of a successful country is when people feel safe and secure. If they're constantly looking over their shoulder, worried about anything that they gain being stolen from them, that's a problem and is not conducive to high academic achievement. I think school safety is of the utmost importance. I think that no matter what neighborhood a student comes from, they should look at the school as a beacon of safety where they can go and they can be themselves and they can feel safe and not be free from harassment by other students and basically being terrorized by other students, and who roam schools with impunity often. So I think that's paramount, and the current school plan, I think the armed SRO is a good part of that. Some of the threats come from outside, but they need to feel safe and secure. They need to see the police officers as one of the components of providing safety and security. So that's a cultural shift for some groups where they need to see the police officer there as a friend who is there to look out for the best interests and look out for their safety. Once you have that, and you have order restored in the school, you have teachers who are there to teach, and students are there to learn. I mean, that's why everybody sends their child to school, because they want them to have high academic standards in a safe and loving environment, and school safety is a big part of that.
Stop it.
School safety really is two parts to me. It is our police department that we've created and very proud of over this past year, and the discipline order, how we discipline our students to keep order in our buildings. And the plan that we have right now, we're operating under, we have 30 officers that are armed and trained to meet armed threats that appear in our buildings and deal with other issues that are criminal in nature, not disciplinary, but criminal in nature. And we have safety administrators in 52 of our buildings who are part of the communication system to LMPD. So when we get information about things happening, that information can also filter to LMPD. We have a link now, again, that we did not have for a while. And I think we've also had 2 directors of violence prevention in our organizational structure that meets with safe and healthy neighborhoods to try and get off violent situations. But the discipline part is also essential in safety, school safety, and I think our administrators need to be held accountable for enforcing consequences that are meaningful to kids, that they don't want, but are definite and are there and enforced consistently and fairly. And our administrators need to afraid to enforce our discipline code.
Thank you. We'll now move on to closing statements, and we'll start with Ms. Duncan.
So I think probably, I have been on the board for 16 years, and I think my experience prior to that, in addition to the experience on the board, kind of uniquely qualifies me to continue this service. I have earned the trust of the staff. I have earned the endorsement of the teachers and the endorsement of the Realtors Association. I have earned the trust of parents because I constantly field phone calls and try and help guide them through our system and into around situations that they're in and to the right people. I'm visible, I'm accessible, I'm unafraid to stand up and tell the truth about the situation here that we have in JCPS, and I'm unafraid to stand alone sometimes. Oftentimes I do vote by myself, but sometimes I don't agree with the recommendation, and I will do that. I think that for me, many things are happening in our system that I'm proud of. We need to work on our challenges right now. As you can see, the pandemic has hit our kids hard, and I think that as long as we are continuing to provide extra support for our students to help catch them up, then we will be back on track with that. But I would love an opportunity to continue the progress that I see us making.
Thank you. We'll move on to Mr. Pachetti.
The sad fact is that over the last decade or so, the schools have been going downhill to such a point where in recent years, JCPS is one of the worst districts in the state. We're dragging down state averages. When it becomes acceptable for 30–40% of students to be proficient in math or reading, that means 60 or 70% of the people are not proficient, and the schools are not preparing them. I started off my student teaching at Iroquois High School 28 years ago, 29 years ago, and the school then was pretty much in chaos. And I look at today where I just checked out their ACT scores for the graduating class, and I didn't even know scores went that low. That's how bad they were. And I just think about all the thousands of students that have been funneled through schools like that and throughout JCPS over the last 30 years, and how we failed those students because we have low academic standards. The success that's been touted of a higher graduation rate really means nothing if you're just funneling kids through. And if they're not learning anything, then that you're not going to get any of the benefits that you would normally get from a high school graduate who has earned that diploma. So I want to work to try to increase academic achievement and make real standards. I also want to give opportunity to diversify to an even greater extent the vocational program in JCPS, because not everybody is an academic student, at least at the high school level. And so I want to make sure everybody's got the opportunity to learn.
Thank you. Mr. Singleton?
So essentially, this is where I grew up. I've seen this from the very bottom all the way up. And here I am, 5 minutes away from Iroquois High School. And they have a 7% grade level reading, only 7%. You have all these people getting taxed, and what happens? Well, first, the businesses go. Then the people who are going decent, they go. And where does the tax burden go after that? It goes to the people. And then when you get the product for raising more and more taxes, and as I'm watching house after house after house broken down, the product is way below level education, so that we get stuck, and the burden gets heavier and heavier and heavier. Now, to be honest with you, it's not just an issue of parents and kids or teachers. It's the curriculum. We've got bad curriculum. You go over to Goose Rock Elementary or Clay County Schools, they went from the 20s to the 90s, okay, maybe 89. They went, in 2 years, they got that stuff taken care of, okay? When the money's not attached to things, then things can happen. And I'll tell you what, so many school board candidates around the board are so far attached that they're being paid to put lipstick on a pig. But I'll tell you what, I don't have any money on me. I'm just here to make some bacon.
Thank you. I would like to thank all the candidates for being here and answering the questions of the PTA. Thank you, and good night. Here's one more.